heart and root. By heart and root is how, however unseen by others or in our own mirrors, we move, want to move, can move through the world, through the days, the dances of life, love, work, wondering, with our hearts wildly open, reaching up into the light, with our roots wildly free, reaching down into our earths, to all the places where we're deeply touched and nourished, where we can grow into our fullness, soothe our sorrows, heal our woundedness, where we can flow with such great aliveness. Welcome to the latest Floating Poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in to the 85th show in my ongoing weekly series, coming to you live from the good earth and sea-steady coast of New England, of Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully. Last week we explored gathering of many kinds, from the in and regathering of self to the gathering of resolve and resilience, the gathering of kindred spirits, of people in the present for cultural events and celebrations, and in the past for ancient rituals, and not least to the gathering of vital thoughts, things, feelings. This week, coming to balance, groundings, centerings of varied kinds, inside and outerly, choosing for us this program, cultural commentary, poetry, and inquiry, that may lead to some of those places, or greater awareness of, or possibility for entering and keeping these states of being as you move through your days, your life, these times. So let's lean in together, see what we glean, what we might discover. And maybe we start with the robin. Sings its song, its whole self, from the center, the bright red center of its breast. Never hesitates or longs to sing out its winged soul, simply does, no matter the day or whether anyone is listening. And what of us and our life song? What of those afraid or waiting, unsure or forgetting their natural calling? Shall we, they, be like the robin and follow, take heart and lead forth without bother or further ado our own springing music, the pure song we each have to sing, can sing. Into every day we have breath, into every moment we're living here in the inviting air. From Psychology Today, Diana Rabb, PhD, from her empowerment diary. Are you grounded, centered, or both? Some people may think the terms are synonymous, but there are some distinctions. Being grounded is the ability to be completely aware and conscious during the present moment. If you're grounded, you practice a deep sense of mindfulness and rarely think about, quote, what ifs. When you're grounded, you're in complete control of your mental and emotional self and not easily influenced by other ideas or individuals. Being centered means that you have a reference point or a place to come back to when life's challenges and emotions push you off balance. The center is the place you know you have to get back to. A good way to think of the center is to imagine the medicine wheel that is a part of many Native American cultures. The wheel represents the 4 directions in the physical world, and each direction refers to a part of you. For example, the north represents the mind, the south represents the heart, the east represents the place of spirit, and the west represents the body. To maintain a sense of well-being, all the directions must be balanced. You're probably aware of the importance of balancing your body, mind, and spirit, so this is a similar concept and a way to bring you to your center. From the Marginalian on the art of centering, it's about potter and poet M.C. Richards and what she learned at the wheel, at the potter's wheel. Centering is a verb, she said, an ongoing process, a way of balancing a spiritual resource in times of conflict, an imagination, an alchemical vessel, a retort, which bears an integration of purposes, an integration of levels of consciousness. And this is from her book, Centering in Pottery, Poetry, and the Person. What an interesting combination, being a potter and a poet. There's certainly poetics in pottery, that's for certain. She said centering can be called to like a divine ear. It is the discipline of bringing in, of sympathy or empathy, rather than of leaving out, of saying yes, yes to what we behold, to what is holy and to what is unbearable. But my experience tells me now that there is an important, crucial stage of saying yes to a no, for resistance also must be embraced. Not only accepting resistance, but practicing it. The hardest and most rewarding lesson has been to learn to experience antipathy objectively with warmth, for it follows a gesture of separating, and the goal, which is to be both separate and connected, requires that one move inwardly in opposite directions, toward self-definition and toward community, toward ethical individualism and toward social justice. It is this fusing of the opposites that centering enables. In centering the clay on the potter's wheel, one centers down, yes, and then one immediately centers up, down and up, wide and narrow, letting focus bear within it an expanded consciousness and letting a widened awareness have the commitment to detail of a focused attention. Not either or, but both, and. You can perhaps feel the inner movement of a centering consciousness that plays dynamically in the tides of inner and outer, self and other, in an instinctive hope toward wholeness. Thank you, M.C. Richards. And here on the heels of that is a meditation on the vernal equinox, but it's all about being centered. It's called Serenely Centered. You're floating straight up, above a field or an ocean, a forest or mountain. Your limbs are loose, your gaze is soft. A warm breeze plays on your skin. Centered over your head is a great sun. Below your soles a great moon. The three of you floating together. Balanced weightlessly, cradled gently in space, in the open sky. Your three bodies, a trinity of light and lightness, serenely centered with the earth, the fertile earth, your home, your breathing and birthing place, being and becoming place, that turns itself now slowly, now surely again to flower at your feet. So stillness, calmness are vital to balance, to groundedness. Maybe you can feel that with this poem I'm about to share, that maybe we can go to that place together for a moment. This is from Gorizia, from the ancient island of Kea in the Cyclades in Greece, the Aegean, 1 August, years back. It's called Mesimeri, siesta. Sun-caked white walls, cascades of bougainvillea, scents of sweet basil, jasmine, geranium that plume as you pass through the quiet hours. Sea blue shutters closed. Stillness. Even the cicadas slighter. The sleeping bodies of the islanders lighter. The passage of time slower. Mesimeri. Here's Rebecca's sonnet on how walking vitalizes the meanderings of the mind. She said, I suspect that the mind, like the feet, works at about 3 miles an hour. If this is so, then modern life is moving faster than the speed of thought or thoughtfulness. Most of the time, walking is merely practical, the unconsidered locomotive means between two sites. To make it into an investigation, a ritual, a meditation, is a special subset of walking, physiologically like and philosophically unlike the way the mail carrier brings the mail and the office worker reaches the train, which is to say that the subject of walking is in some sense about how we invest universal acts with particular meanings, like eating or breathing. It can be invested with wildly different cultural meanings, from the erotic to the spiritual, from the revolutionary to the artistic. The rhythm generates a kind of rhythm of thinking, and the passage through a landscape echoes or stimulates the passage through a series of thoughts. This creates an odd consonance between internal and external passage, one that suggests that the mind is also a landscape of sorts, and that walking is one way to traverse it. A new thought often seems like a feature of that landscape that was there all along, as though thinking were traveling rather than making. And so one aspect of the history of walking is the history of thinking made concrete. For the motions of the mind cannot be traced, but those of the feet can. Many people nowadays live in a series of interiors, home, car, gym, office, shops, disconnected from each other. On foot, everything stays connected, for while walking one occupies the spaces between those interiors in the same way one occupies those interiors. One lives in the whole world rather than in interiors built up against it. Thank you, Rebecca Sonnet, for that. Billy Collins has this poem, Fishing on the Susquehanna, in July. I've never been fishing on the Susquehanna, or in any river for that matter, to be perfectly honest. Not in July or any month, but have I had the pleasure, if it is a pleasure, of fishing on the Susquehanna. I'm more likely to be found in a quiet room like this one, of a painting of a woman on the wall, a bowl of tangerines on the table, trying to manufacture the sensation of fishing on the Susquehanna. There's little doubt that others have been fishing on the Susquehanna and rowing upstream in a wooden boat, sliding the oars under the water, then raising them to drip in the light. But the nearest I have ever come to fishing on the Susquehanna was one afternoon in a museum in Philadelphia, when I balanced a little egg of time in front of a painting in which that river curled around a bend under a blue, cloud-ruffled sky, dense trees along the banks, and a fellow with a red bandana sitting in a small green flat-bottomed boat holding the thin whip of a pole. That is something I am unlikely ever to do, I remember saying to myself and the person next to me. Then I blinked and moved on to other American scenes of haystacks, water whitening over rocks, even one of a brown hare who seemed so wired with alertness, I imagined him springing right out of the frame. Thank you, Billy Collins. Walt Whitman said, "Now I see the secret of the making of the best persons. It is to grow in the open air and to eat and sleep with the earth." Which brought me to this poem that I wrote in the spring of 2017, Planting Yourself. In the earth, in your breath, in the morning light, in your heart, each day a place, a chance to break new ground, root, grow, flower. Planting yourself. From CEO Sage, grounding techniques, how to ground yourself, to calm and regain your center, by Scott Jeffrey. He had a couple of good thoughts. Grounding is a similar concept to centering. The center is expansive, including your body as well as your mind, heart, and spirit. Once you learn how to ground yourself, it's easier to find your center. Grounding techniques are designed to redistribute the energy from your head or mind into your body. That is, it has an almost instant calming effect. Most of our stress and anxiety results from a disconnection from our bodies. The more rooted you are in your body, the less stress and anxiety you experience. Hippocrates, who said, "Illnesses do not come upon us out of the blue. They are developed from small daily sins against nature. When enough sins have accumulated, illnesses will suddenly appear." So among his techniques, cover your crown. When you're ungrounded, place one hand over the crown, your head. That's it. For about half a minute to a minute, feel your feet. Sitting or standing, place all your awareness on the bottom of your feet. Pay attention to any sensations. Again, half a minute to a minute, easily done by all of us, I would say. Follow your breath, close your eyes, and as you inhale, trace the air as it enters your nose and goes into your lungs. On the exhale, follow the air leaving your lungs and exiting your nose or mouth. This gets more effective with practice. The key is to observe the breath instead of forcing it with your mind. Stand like a tree. Imagine roots growing out the bottom of your feet, extending deep into the ground beneath you. And take a cold shower. It has many health benefits like that. I actually do that every morning at the end of the warm showers, the cold. And he has some quotes interspersed, which I'm sharing with you. Khalil Gibran, and forget not that the earth delights to feel your bare feet, and the winds long to play with your hair. Isn't that lovely? And then he talks about grounding to the earth, which is called earthing. And it means connecting your physical body, your skin layer, to the earth. And so he says to do that, while some early versions of the shoe were made of papyrus, most were crafted from cowhide, bearskin, deerskin, wood, and canvas. When we come to the industrial age, the first rubber-soled shoes date back to 1876 in England. By World War II, synthetic soled shoes were commonplace. We, as a people, haven't recovered ever since. If you recall from high school physics, substances called conductors allow electricity to travel through easily. Others are called insulators that inhibit the flow of electricity. Rubber is an insulator, and rubber-soled shoes have broken our connection to the earth. But that, hence the bare feet we talked, Gibran talking about, and I go as barefoot as possible through the days. A little tricky in the winter, but it's doable. So he says, for that, earthing, stand on the earth, grass, stone, sand, or dirt work best. You can stand in one place, walk, or lay down. You only need one point of contact to establish a ground connection. 1 foot alone on the earth will ground you. For healing, the researchers behind the earthing movement recommend staying barefoot on the earth for at least 20 minutes, twice a day. So, contemplate that. Thank you, Scott. Jeffrey. So, earthing and composing ourselves and especially composing ourselves in nature, being able to do that. Years back, I had this moment composing myself, and out of that, this poem, and many such centerings since, by small and large bodies of water in particular. Come, sit by the lily pond. Come, sit by the lily pond. Quietly compose yourself in cool serenity. Let your thoughts drift here like blossoms on the water's calm surface. One of the shared grounding joy of loving partners. Louis MacNeice has this poem, new to me, Meeting Point. Time was away and somewhere else. There were 2 glasses and 2 chairs and 2 people with 1 pulse. Somebody stopped the moving stairs. Time was away and somewhere else. And they were neither up nor down. The stream's music did not stop flowing through heather, limpid brown, although they sat in a coffee shop, and they were neither up nor down. The bell was silent in the air, holding its inverted poise between the clang and clang of flour, a brazen calyx of no noise. The bell was silent in the air. The camels crossed the miles of sand that stretched around the cups and plates. The desert was their own. They planned to portion out the stars and dates. The camels crossed the miles of sand. Time was away and somewhere else. The waiter did not come. The clock forgot them, and the radio waltz came out like water from a rock. Time was away and somewhere else. Her fingers flicked away the ash that bloomed again in tropic trees, not caring if the markets crashed when they had forests such as these. Her fingers flicked away the ash. God, or whatever it means, the good, be praised that time can stop like this, that what the heart has understood can verify in the body's peace. God, or whatever means the good. Time was away, and she was here, and life no longer what it was. The bell was silent in the air, and all the room one glow, because time was away and she was here. Thank you, Louis MacNeice. It's very lovely. And what happens on the obverse or other side of that when we become uprooted, ungrounded by life, even in a way unearthed, the world pulled out from under our feet in a form. This is a poem of mine after that happened to me years back. It's called A Tree is Falling. A monumental tree in the forest is falling, so colossal, so deeply rooted, so elementally entwined that it will not fall easily or swiftly or quietly. And as it looses from the earth, from the sky, earth first, it will shake and sound through the whole forest, through all the rings and canopies, hard and soft woods, all the places of light and shadow, growth and groundwater, quake and resound through all things winged and footed, flowering, streaming, flourishing here. And when onward, unmasted, it lays at great length to rest among the abundant mosses and ferns, it will be monumentally sad for me to see, to lose, and remember in times to come how glorious a living thing it was. What a high-spiring, spreading hymn of joy it was. It sang without pause in the forest of my heart. The tree is falling. Then falling, I thought of tides rising and falling, and nature balancing itself, and the oceans that came into my consciousness. And from eos.org was a piece about breaking internal tides keep the ocean in balance by studying how underwater waves strike the continental slope of Tasmania. Researchers seek to uncover the mechanisms that keep the circulation of the global ocean in balance. And so I like this part the most, the pulse of the oceans. To our delight and relief, as the initial real-time data began to flow into our lab, we saw evidence of giant internal tides breaking 1,000 to 2,500 meters down in the sea, areas of intense turbulence extending 1 to 200 meters above the sloping seafloor are seen on every tidal cycle. The deep sea, once thought stagnant and quiescent, is in fact rather explosive at special sites where the internal tide shoals. Intense, turbulent events pulse with a tidal heartbeat. Oh, so it gives me a quiver. Well, here on this seacoast and others I've lived on and traveled to and through is nature's great and immense and daily balancing act of tides in and out, high and low, all over the earth, all through time, that we can observe or imagine. And Henry Wadsworth Longfellow had this poem, "The tide rises, the tide falls." The tide rises, the tide falls. The twilight darkens, the curlew calls. Along the sea sands damp and brown, the traveler hastens toward the town, and the tide rises, the tide falls. Darkness settles on roofs and walls, but the sea in the darkness calls. The little waves with their soft white hands efface the footprints in the sands, and the tide rises, the tide falls. The morning breaks, the steeds in their stalls stamp and neigh, as the hostler calls. The day returns, but nevermore returns the traveler to the shore, and the tide rises, the tide falls. Thank you, Mr. Longfellow. Here's a poem of mine around the tide, like the tide, it's called. This ever-changing life of ours, restless and constant in its arrivals and departures, ephemeral and confederal, bringing friendships, moments, enlightenments in, carrying lives, chapters, sentiments out, showing us its natural flow of highs and lows, fullness and ebbings, its breathing like balancing act, the beauty and mystery of our earth-shared impermanency. And around this, listeners, a question is, what are the tidal flows of your life and of your internal tidal movements, I guess we could say. Tidal movements, physical and emotional. What might they be if you were going to describe them, and how have they changed from then to now? And consider how beautifully, unfailingly, the whole earth balances, not just the tides, but especially its solstices and equinoxes. Well, I have a couple of poems around that for us. Eternal Rhythms was a poem, an ode to the autumnal equinox. The sun moves south in a bright cross over the equator, over great rainforests, hunting tigers, hidden tribes. Horus entwines with Seth, Gwyn with Gwythyr, the Holly King with the Oak King. Light balances with darkness, night with day. Still warm land yields its last best fruits for harvest, while wicker men made of barley stems are set afire. While sacred corn, black, white, yellow, red, is ground and watered to life, while 7 looming faces made of stone look solemnly out to sea. Gaze Easter islandly into sunset. A feathered serpent, triangled with light, Father, Mother, Son, descends an unshaded pyramid. Mystics too descend within themselves to discover. Spirit enters waiting bodies, and at midnight Alcyone arrives and aligns incandescently from the Pleiades and the earth. The whole earth turns again to its eternal rhymes and rhythms. That was written above the Hudson River, New York City, back in September of 2012. Place is often very important to, at least to me, to where things are composed, where they arise. Then for the summer solstice, the balancing act, as this poem, is ours to learn from nature, which, left undisturbed by man, by us, always stays there in perfect balance. And on solstices like this, and equinoxes, returns our whole sphere completely there, as if from its own vast consciousness, an intelligence far beyond yours and mine, to remind us again, subtly and immensely, call to those listening, sensing, to find, feel, keep an inner footing, a balance of being, to seek equilibrium with the self, yes, but also with each other, and even more sentiently with this natural world, this phenomenal world that makes so much life and beauty, bounty, and greater harmony possible. The balancing act. It was written on the summer solstice on Quannacontog Beach, Weekapaug, Rhode Island, last year, 2020. Yes, so nature, the natural world, shows us so simply, so purely, to me, so powerfully, examples of equilibrium, like the great blue heron. Here was a meditation on one of them that struck me. Over time, I would commune with that bird in different ways, knowingly, and we would see each other, or we wouldn't see each other. We would see each other, but I'd see him and he wouldn't me, and vice versa. Sometimes we did see each other very directly. The great blue, it's called. I love his presence, his absolute stillness, aura of solitude, sacredness, his long-legged patience in the wind-stirred pond, gracefully at one with everything, wholly attuned to every moment, movement, above and below the surface. His watchfulness, sureness, despite the drift of time and summer clouds. Into the split second he spies and elegantly spears a shining fish and flies off in his great blueness to a nearby bank of cattail grass to feast and rest. And Craig Miller has this poem called Watch. We pass the straits of the Cape, where grazing whales gather, though they're not, I'm told, social creatures by nature. Alice asks how they can sleep if they must think to breathe. cranial hemispheres wink and wake and alternate, so whales are half awake or half asleep, balanced between each of our states through dive and breach. Once on the kitchen wall of a dune shack, I saw, like a headdress, the baleen of a whale. Frayed filaments run from a thin, curled, rib-like bone, sieves for the sea. Like the sickle moon fin, negatively buoyant, I sink in sleep but end, I think, where I begin. Following one as it leaves, two other whales, we see suddenly not what we're heading for, but the asymmetrically colored snout of a fin whale as it rises parallel within a stone's throw of the boat. The great eyes set back, water crashing, rushing to let me see where it ought to be. I lose track, the mottled chin's marble-veined, swirling through its green veil, which the top jaw slits. And then, that's it, I think. Nights I'm thrown up right from my rest. Brine thumps my chest. Thank you, Greg Miller. Well, I could not help but thinking of balancing acts of tightrope walking, which interestingly enough is called, which I actually knew because I love words, obviously you wouldn't be surprised, and it's called Phenomenalism, the art of walking along a thin wire or rope, and it goes way back in time, and sometimes it says from this Encyclopedia of Trivia, Roman tightrope walkers stretched cables between the tops of two neighboring hills and performed comic dances and pantomimes while crossing. On June 30th, 1859, Jean-François Blandin Gravelet successfully crossed Niagara Gorge on a tightrope 160 feet above the water near the location of the current Rainbow Bridge. He repeated the feat a number of times thereafter, always with different variations, blindfolded, trundling a wheelbarrow on stilts, somersaulting and backflipping, or with his manager, Harry Colcord, clinging to his back. Imagine that scene. One of his crossings involved him carrying a stove and utensils on his back, walking to the center of the cable and starting a fire. He then sat down on the wire and cooked and ate an omelet. You almost couldn't believe that, but it's true. In 1948, the oldest tightrope walker, William Ivey Baldwin, celebrated his 82nd birthday by crossing a 319-foot-long high wire suspended across the El Dorado Canyon in Colorado. Love that. And, of course, we all would know Philippe Petit's famous high wire performance between the Twin Towers, known as, quote, the artistic crime of the century. So I leapt from there to Wikipedia. I'd seen the film Man on Wire, I think is the title of the documentary about him, which is wonderful. That intrepid fellow, and of course he was the high wire artist who gained fame for that walk between the towers, but also between the towers of Notre Dame in Paris in 1971 and the Sydney Harbor Bridge in 73. Incredible. He called it Le Coup, C-O-U-P, and he had a 440-pound cable and a custom-made 30-foot-long, 55-pound balancing pole, and was out there for 45 minutes. He made 8 passes along the wire. But interestingly, he was very adept at equestrianism, juggling, fencing, carpentry, rock climbing, and bullfighting. So he had all these other abilities that he brought to his doings, his adventurings. And he spurned circuses and their formulaic performances, and he created his street persona on the sidewalks of Paris. And in the early 70s, visited New York, where he frequently juggled and worked on a slack line in Washington Square Park, which I did not know, actually. So bravo to Philippe, to Monsieur Petit. What an inspiration. You know, he had a couple of quotes that I thought you'd like to know about. Whenever other worlds invite us, whenever we are balancing on the boundaries of our limited human condition, that's where life starts. That's where you start feeling yourself living. With that. And he also said, you must not fall. When you lose your balance, resist for a long time before turning yourself toward the earth, then jump. You must not force yourself to stay steady. You must move forward. Thank you, Philippe Petit. Okay, on we go. Sorry. Joyce Sutphin, Grounded. Poem, Grounded. My father will not climb into the trees today. He's 84 and tells me that he was never fond of heights, that he hated putting up the pipes to fill the silo, that he did not enjoy climbing to the top of the barn to fix the pulley on the hay sling. I have no desire to be in the air, he says, and I always thought he loved walking the rim of the silo, waving his hat in circles overhead, shouting down to where we stood grounded and gazing up at him. Thank you, Joyce Sutphin. I thought along, too, as I was curating the show for us, of other parts of life and living where balance matters a great deal, from cooking to thinking to working. And I actually dropped out the cooking part, although there's a wonderful book I was reading that talks a lot about balancing salt and fats, and really good book. I don't have it in front of me right this moment, but in the interest of keeping in a good frame of time, I'll come back to that another time, maybe in part 2 of a food program for us. So I haven't gotten to that again yet. But we often hear of the idea of work-life balance. And the poet and philosopher David Whyte, that I often draw on, actually spoke quite a lot about that. And he had a book he wrote called The Three Marriages, Reimagining Work, Self, and Relationship. And he's written of the limiting notion of that idea of work-life balance. And I thought it might be interesting to you to hear what he said. The current understanding of work-life balance is too simplistic. People find it hard to balance work with family, family with self, because it might not be a question of balance. Some other dynamic is in play, something to do with a very human attempt at happiness that does not quantify different parts of life and then set them against one another. We're collectively exhausted because of our inability to hold competing parts of ourselves together in a more integrated way. A sense of belonging and not belonging is lived out by most people through 3 principal dynamics. First, through relationship to other people and other living things. Second, through work. And third, through an understanding of what it means to be themselves, discrete individuals, alive and seemingly separate from everyone and everything else. These are the 3 kinds of marriages, of work, self, and other. We can call these separate commitments marriages because at their core they're usually lifelong commitments, and they involve vows made either consciously or unconsciously. To neglect any one of the 3 marriages is to impoverish them all, because they're not actually separate commitments but different expressions of the way each individual belongs to the world. We should stop thinking in terms of work-life balance. It's a concept that has us simply lashing ourselves on the back and working too hard in each of the 3 commitments. In the ensuing exhaustion, we ultimately give up on one or more of them to gain an easier life. Thank you, David Whyte. And interrelated to that, through Farnham Street, Brain Food, lovely site, could subscribe to, is a quote from On Groundedness from Brad Stulberg, who wrote a book all about it. It's called The Practice of Groundedness. It does not eliminate passion, productivity, or all forms of striving and ambition. Instead, it's about ditching an omnipresent and frantic anxiety to begin living in alignment with your innermost values, pursuing your interests, and expressing your authentic self in the here and now. When you are grounded, there is no need to look up or down. You are where you are, and you hold true strength and power from that position. Your success and the way in which you pursue it becomes more enduring and robust. You gain the confidence to opt out of the consumer-driven rat race that leaves you feeling like you are never enough. Thank you, Brad Stulberg. And Carl Sagan, on mastering the vital balance of skepticism and openness, I thought was relevant, on fine-tuning the machinery of distinguishing the valid from the non-valid. And he said, if you're only skeptical, then no new ideas make it through to you. You never learn anything new. You become a crotchety old person convinced that nonsense is ruling the world. But every now and then, maybe once in 100 cases, a new idea turns out to be on the mark, valid and wonderful. If you're too much in the habit of being skeptical about everything, you're going to miss or resent it, and either way you will be standing in the way of understanding and progress. On the other hand, if you're open to the point of gullibility and have not an ounce of skeptical sense, then you can't distinguish the useful as from the worthless ones. If all ideas have equal validity, you're lost, because then it seems to me no ideas have any validity at all. Some ideas are better than others. The machinery for distinguishing them is an essential tool in dealing with the world, and especially in dealing with the future. And it's precisely the mix of these two modes of thought that is central to the success of science. And I would say, I would add to that the balance of thinking, of our thinking, your thinking, mine. And there's the balancing of mind, spirit, soul. Rob Bresney pulled out a few things in his one of his e-letters on the psychological and spiritual. Psychological work focuses more on what has gone wrong, how we have been wounded in our relations with others, and how to go about addressing that. And this, by the way, is the psychotherapist John Wellwood saying that. Spiritual work focuses more on what is intrinsically right, how we have infinite resources at the core of our nature that we can cultivate in order to live more expansively. If psychological work thins the clouds, spiritual work invokes the sun. I like that. And Bresney said, to his ideas, I would add that the spirit is about rising above and seeking what's most noble, while the soul is about diving in and wrestling with exactly what is. Both tasks are valuable. Neither realm is inherently better or more important. If you have a bias one way or the other, it's usually best to be conscientious about maintaining a balance. And he ends that with a quote from the Dalai Lama. I call the high and light aspects of my being spirit, and the dark and heavy aspects soul. Soul is at home in the deep shaded valleys. Heavy torpid flowers saturated with black grow there. The rivers flow like warm syrup. Spirit is a land of high white peaks and glittering jewel-like lakes and flowers. Life is sparse and sounds travel great distances. So how about that? I was also intrigued with Bill Plotkin. I read him once or twice recently, and for different reasons, different themes, but from Animas Valley Institute, his Soulcraft musings, and on two realms of purpose, two stages of life. And what struck me about that is that he was talking about the journey of soul initiation, and it says it begins for a person only after they've achieved a significant measure of social authenticity and vocational success. A genuine and socially workable personality must be achieved before you can transcend that identity and descend toward your deeper identity, your original instructions, or maybe we could also say your deeper ground, your epicenter. But he said there's one thing that's common to both, early and late adolescence, a bone-deep longing, an unspeakable desire to belong to your world as fully and as deeply as you can. This longing is always there within you and can bring you to tears at any moment without warning. It's what keeps you going despite life's endless challenges and frustrations. They become a kind of foundation upon which develops your deeper longing to unearth and embody the passions of your soul. Think about Plotkin like that. Okay. So, a poem and a question through the poem. Where's your center? Where's your center of gravity? In the ponderousness of your head, in the tidal basin of your heart, or the rivering valley of your hara, that third place, nexus, where everything unifies, where deep vitality springs, true equilibrium plies, where one's whole being coalesces, the body-soul evanesces. Maybe time to discover and enter the most vital center of life gravity, fulcruming barely a hand below your navel, to recover the wholeness of being, calling there for you, for all of us. So, what are the places, the points, the moments when you feel most grounded, most whole, most balanced, most centered? As we bend now into the last part of this week's show, and maybe as you wind down your own day right now, is this poem, When the Day Has Been Decanted, a poem I wrote back in time when I was living in Upper Upper West Side of Manhattan. When the house is settled for the night, and the dinner dishes are washed and dried, when the lights in the neighboring apartments are turned out and the moon is turned on, we unfold ourselves in bed to talk and read side by side, then sink down into sleep when the day has been decanted. A short story of Falling is a poem about balancing feeling places through the mind's eye, the heart's eye of watching, of sensing nature at work, at play, at ease, I suppose we could say. It's by Alice Oswald, a short story of falling. It is the story of the falling rain to turn into a leaf and fall again. It is the secret of a summer shower to steal the light and hide it in a flower, and every flower a tiny tributary that from the ground flows green and momentary. This one of water's wishes, and this tail hangs in the seed head smaller than my thumbnail. If only I, a passerby, could pass as clear as water through a plume of grass to find the sunlight hidden at the tip, turning to seed a kind of lifting rain drip, then I might know, like water, how to balance the weight of hope against the light of patience. Water which is so raw, so earthy strong, and lurks in cast iron tanks and leaks along, drawn under gravity toward my tongue to cool and fill the pipework of this song, which is the story of the falling rain that rises to the light and falls again. Thank you, Alice Oswald. And just one more time, David Whyte, our poet and philosopher man, but this time on courage, love, and hardship as grounds for self-expansion. He says courage is what love looks like when tested by the simple everyday necessities of being alive. And we might ponder how it matters, or how it in your life travels, how it has mattered or can. When the touchable rawness of life becomes part of the fabric of the every day, and a robust, luminous vulnerability becomes shot through with the necessary, imminent, and inevitable prospect of loss, has been described for centuries as the dark night of the soul, la noche oscura del alma. But perhaps this dark night could be more accurately described as the meeting of two immense storm fronts, the squally, vulnerable edge between what overwhelms human beings from the inside and what overpowers them from the outside. Walking the pilgrim edge between the two, holding them together, is the hardest place to stay, to breathe of both and make a world of both, and to be active in their exchange, aware of our need to be needed, our wish to be seen, our constant need for help and succor, but inhabiting a world of luminosity and intensity, subject to the wind and the weather, surrounded by the music of existence, able to be found by the living world, and with a wild, self-forgetful ability to respond to its call when needed, a rehearsal, in fact, for the act of dying, a place where inside and outside can reverse and flow with no fixed form. Thank you, David Whyte. That's from his book, Consolations. Wonderful book. I've read and reread it many times. Well, here's a poem toward breathing, of both literal and larger kinds, that we can practice. Remember to breathe. Inhale now. Exhale then. Inhale possibility. Exhale impossibility. Inhale tenderness. Exhale loneliness. Inhale freedom. Exhale boredom. Inhale you, all of you. Keep breathing. And this, from this meditation on an autumnal equinox, is about illuminating, drinking in, embodying our fullness, our wholeness, our feeling center, in the center of our feeling. Feel all the light falling. Let all the light fall today in a rare receiving way, fully, equally, wholly into your hemispheres, your north and south, your left and right brain, your masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, actual and potential self. Pause. Close your sunlit eyes and slowly, slowly breathe. Open. Widen. Feel the life-giving, life-renewing rays enter the center, the equator of your body, your being, bringing all parts of your inner world into great balance, bathing all parts of you in greater warmth and health, brightening, lightening your places, crevices, passages of darkness, sadness, hiddenness, shadow. Let all the new light falling, streaming, seeking, find and fill you this day with a keener seeing, sense of turning, promise of becoming. I think you'd enjoy, some of you, an interview that was done with Dara McAnulty from Emergence magazine, and who said, "I don't know what the future will be, but I absolutely know that things that give us joy in this world, especially the natural world, are essential for everything." Well, she is a teenage autistic author, naturalist, and conservationist from Northern Ireland. And after years of writing his blog, Dara McAnulty, naturalist Dara, published a book called Diary of a Young Naturalist when he was 14. He won the prize for nature writing back in time in Britain. And so here's an interview with Dara, now 17, about this book and about his approach to living a life immersed in and guided by the living world. Very interesting. So you might want to look that up, Emergence magazine. It's online. And it's all about the great necessity of staying rooted in joy. And as you know from me, some of you would know that one of my mottos is go where the joy is, and go there often, and certainly stay rooted there. Okay, we're coming down to just the last few things for us now. Okay. Let's balance ourselves, listen to our bodies and beings beingness with the natural world around us, nature that makes our life, all life, possible and beautiful. Kiss the earth with your feet, the sky with your eyes, the sea with your ears, your life with your softly parted heart. And collectively, as a society, as a humanity, a body of humanity, let's seek equanimity. For when we are at peace, when we are in balance as beings with each other and with the natural world, what great goodness can arise. This is an anthem poem for the Truth Foundation of the United States that I composed as their poet laureate. It's called The Times of Truce. It's also presented at on the eve of the Winter Olympics back in 2018. The Times of Truce. When the blowing winds cease, when the swelling seas settle down, when the earth enters a still point near dawn, near dusk, or the night skies grow silent with stars, whenever the world of nature makes peace with itself, and man mirrors that peace in himself, gives free leave to his fellow man, these are the times when rare and graceful plumes of truce, deep spirits of unity, community, can be found and greatly felt by everything living, be remembered and honored by everyone, young to old, hearkening. And my friends, if there ever more need than now for times of truce with each other, I think we're at it. I think we're at that point. May it be so. And last for now, an invitation and invocation for each of us, for you. Rise from your roots, from the deep earth of yourself, into the wealth of everything the world is offering is asking you to branch out to, ascend to, with all feeling, all rejoicing. Thank you again for leaning in, floating, and feeling in, for centering into this show today. If you have a question, comment, or kudo, send me a note. My email is colin@thepoetorialist.com. If you'd like to show your thanks with a donation, that'd be so welcome and helpful. You can contribute easily by PayPal or Venmo, or directly through my site, thepoetorialist.com, or by mail to me at P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island, 02891. For any patrons interested in exploring hosting me for a given time on a given property as a working poet in residence to bring forth a new body of inspiring poetic art and dedicated to you, please reach out. I also seek fellow artists to collaborate with on projects musical to theatrical, including working with other composers on scoring selected poems and poetically narrating productions. Meanwhile, you can hear all my broadcasts online, on YouTube, as pausable replays, and ahead all past and new shows on Spotify, Google, Anchor.fm, and elsewhere. Many listeners tell me they like to revisit a program and pause in places to return to a resonating thought or poem more deeply. I hope you'll lean in again next week, or soon again. Until then, dear listeners, here's to finding and keeping your balance, grounding yourself well, feeling centered, and being inspired by the deep rootedness and steadiness, the equilibrium of nature, as you travel through your days and nights, your life questions, your challenges and experiences. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.